in Boulder, Colorado when I lived out there.
Oh,
I don't know
nice.
if that one's still open or not, but that was a good spot.
Hey everybody, we are live. Caught up to me. I gave the thumbs up too soon, I think. But welcome to the February edition of Eureka Whiskey Club virtual tasting. Today we are joined by some great people from Barton 1792 Distillery. So we'll get to these fine gentlemen here in a minute. Just as always, want to talk about some housekeeping stuff. So it was a short month this month, with the first falling on that first Thursday. So that third Thursday came up pretty quick. Hopefully everyone was able to get their bottles for tonight's tasting. I know the tasting is a little bit later than what we normally do, but thanks for joining and being here. And as always, we appreciate everyone being a member. Before I get into prizes, I do want to tease next month's pick. If you have not heard already, we will be doing a Weller 107 barrel pick for next month. And I believe most of the restaurants are already sold out this month. So I definitely make sure your credit card payment is up to date on your Shopify accounts, because you don't want to risk missing out on next month. Because if we do have any openings, I know it'll sell out quickly. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about 1792, another fine whiskey in the Sazerac portfolio. We have two great prizes tonight. As always, please put your questions in the comment section if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and just make sure if whatever account you're logged in is associated, the same name associated with your Whiskey Club membership. So tonight we have first place. We're going to be giving away a signed bottle of 1792 12 year, which was just named by Forbes best Kentucky bourbon in the world for their 2024 whiskey awards. You may remember that we talked to the representative bourbon back in December, who was named, who won some awards at that same award ceremony. And then second place, we have a bottle of 1792 Sweet Wheat, which is one of the 1792 delicious staples of their portfolio. So two great prizes to give away. And without further ado, Ross, Chris, go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us what 1792 is all about.
Absolutely. Ross, I'll kick things off and kick it over to you after I spent a bit of time talking about our distillery's history and a little bit about the brand. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Excited to be back with Eureka Whiskey Group. Was talking to Trevor earlier about being with your all's group. I think it's been 3 years ago, but excited to join the group again for another tasting of 1792 Foolproof. So I am the brand manager for 1792 and premium American whiskey with Sazerac. I've been with the company for 5 years, but I live in Kentucky, and like any good Kentuckian, I love bourbon. And I've been around bourbon for my entire life. I actually grew up in Frankfort, Kentucky, where Buffalo Trace Distillery is. So it's really cool to work in the industry and work on brands that are so near and dear to everybody's hearts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our distillery's history, go through a quick intro to the brands, and then I'm going to kick it to Ross to really go through the tasting, which is what we're all here for. So hopefully you guys are starting to see a screen. If not, Trevor or Ross, can you all see the screen or no?
We can now, yes.
Cool. All right. So a quick background on 1792, if it'll go into screen share here. Okay. So 1792 as a brand has been around since 2002. But Barton 1792 Distillery has been around for quite a bit longer than that. So 1792 is the flagship bourbon of the Barton 1792 Distillery, which is located in Bardstown, Kentucky, which is known as the bourbon capital of the world. As you all know, to be a bourbon, you have to be made in America. And we like to think that almost all the good bourbon comes from Kentucky. About 96% of the world's bourbon does come from Kentucky. We do have some great distilleries across the United States, but there's tons and tons of distilleries in Kentucky and within Bardstown itself. So about a third of that 96% is made in Bardstown, and Barton 1792 has been around doing it for the longest continuously. So the distillery itself was founded in 1889 by a man named Tom Moore, and he ran that distillery up until Prohibition. We were shut down during Prohibition, and after Prohibition, his son Cornelius or Conmore took over and ran it until it was acquired by a group of businessmen from Chicago in the mid 40s, and that's when it was renamed Barton Distillery. We don't actually know where the name Barton came from. There's numerous myths, legends that the name was chosen out of a hat. The name was chosen by somebody who won a poker match. It was named after somebody's dog. I like to think the most simple answer is that Barton is short for Bardstown. The truth is we really don't know. But 1792 as a brand, as I mentioned before, was launched in 2002 and has been growing ever since. It was added to the name of the distillery in 2009, I believe, when Sazerac acquired the property, and has really been the flagship ever since. One of the things I really like to think about 1792 is that apart from the name on the bottle, 1792, the brand is really removed from Kentucky. It's got this really unique package, this really unique look and feel, but it does have that really great quality credential from being made in Kentucky and in such a great distillery at 1792. And that's really reflected by all the awards we've won. As Trevor mentioned, our 12-year-old was named the best bourbon in the world a few weeks ago by Whiskey Magazine, the World Whiskey Awards. And we're really proud of that. And so we're continuing to invest and expand. And that's really all about growing 1792 and bringing more whiskey out to our fans. So before we get into the tasting, I want to show you a quick brand video to give you a bit of a flavor of how we bring the brand to life. And then I'll kick it to Ross for why we're really here, which is to taste and learn from a master distiller. So without further ado, here's a quick video, and then we'll go to Ross.
After a night of hopping from one tiny sushi bar to another in the narrow alleyways of downtown, we stumbled across a door with the number 17 on it. We knocked and it opened, and nervously, we walked inside as the beat of music grew louder until finally we reached a living room where 9 breakdancers were spinning while 2 jazz trumpeters hooted and tooted in time with the crowd's claps. An untypical night calls for an untypical whiskey.
All right. So with that being said, Ross, I'm going to kick it over to you, and we'll get to the fun part, which is actually the tasting and talking about the whiskey.
All right. Thanks, Chris, for the intro. Trevor, thank you for having us on. This is it's a real pleasure. So despite it being a little later than normal here, I told you earlier, and it's true, I can talk whiskey all day and, well, maybe all night. So little bit about me. Again, name Ross Cornelison. I've been the master distiller here for about 1.5 years at Barton 1792, and it's been an absolute blast. And I've been what I would say in the fermentation industry overall for about a decade. So starting out from college, I was at MGP. I think probably most people are familiar with that distillery. If not, it's what is now known as Ross and Squibb over in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. I think, Chris, you threw out the number of 96 or 97% of whiskey is made in, or bourbon is made in Kentucky. I think the other 3% is probably at MGP. And so I was a distillery supervisor and then their fermentation distillation manager, and really got to get my feet wet and work with some great people there, including Greg Metz, who is now the master distiller over at Old Elk. And then from there, life kind of took a turn. And so my wife is a geologist, and she's much smarter than I am anyway. She got a good job offer out in Colorado. So I actually quit my good paying job in Indiana and followed her to Colorado in her career. And, but I said, no matter what, I want to do fermentation. So I worked for a biotech startup doing mushroom fermentation, which is completely different, but pretty wacky. Not those mushrooms, before anybody asks. And but we did things like cordyceps or shiitake, reishi, what some people refer to as mushrooms of the immortals. So that was a completely different but absolute fantastic experience. Really got a lot of good times under my belt there. And then Sazerac came knocking, and we had just found out my wife was pregnant. and I'm from the Midwest, so is she. And so the stars kind of aligned, and I got to move back to the Midwest, be a master distiller, and be close to family and make whiskey. So, which is awesome. I'm originally again from Indiana and went to Purdue University for bioengineering. So great school. Go Boilers, despite a rough basketball loss. I'm excited to have people in California in the Big Ten starting next year, which I think is, I don't even know how many teams are in the Big Ten conference anymore. So probably over 20. But yeah, outside of here, still enjoy whiskey. Love baking, love running, love cooking, love spending time with my son. He's an absolute blast at this point. He's about 16 months old. Have a couple Australian Shepherds who definitely keep us outside more than inside, but that's a blast. So that's a little bit about me. And but yeah, feel free to ask questions. But we should get into the tasting. So Trevor.
Yeah, I had just a couple more questions before we dive into the tasting, if that's okay, just about some your background. So I guess Ross, you have a degree in biological and food process engineering. You had mentioned that you worked with mushrooms previously.
Yep.
I guess was being a master distiller when you were getting your degree, was that ever something you thought would be in your future, or were you hard set on fermenting mushrooms in college? Not those types of mushrooms.
Yep. Good question. So actually, up until my junior year of college, fermentation was not even remotely on my radar. I went into that degree wanting to make cereal because I love Honey Bunches of Oats. And I said, how cool would it be to go make Honey Bunches of Oats for a living? And like walk into the grocery store and be like, yeah.
I know you're telling the truth, because you couldn't make that up even if I paid you to.
Yep. I can get really into it, but I love all the different components that go into Honey Bunches of Oats. I was like, this is like, it seems simple, but it's really kind of a complex cereal when you put it all together. Anyways, so that was like my dream. I don't know if I ever told Chris that, so he's laughing over there. And
first I've heard of it. It's going on the Ross Cornelison Dingo card, though.
Okay, yeah, there you go. But I took a microbiology class my junior year with Dr. Tom Walters. I still remember his name, and it was just a whole new world that no one had ever told me about or I had learned about. And in a matter of, it was probably less than a month, I said, kind of, screw cereal. I'm going to go do fermentation or something with microbiology. And so I started looking around from everything from fuel ethanol fermentation and distillation to going into whiskey, to going into brewing. And anyway, so I was lucky enough, and I can talk about this later on, but I was lucky enough to land a job over at MGP in Southern Indiana, right out of college as a distillery supervisor. But no, whiskey and being a master distiller was not in the cards until junior year of high school or college.
Nice.
Yep.
So 1792 12 year, we talked about just won best bourbon in the world at the Whiskey Awards. So we've talked about this many times on this call, but obviously in order to be called bourbon, it has to come from the United States, even though a lot of people do think that Kentucky is the Mecca of sorts. That's where bourbon was invented, Bourbon County. Why do you feel that? I'm sure you do feel this way. I'm assuming it. I'm sorry if I'm projecting this on you, but why do you feel that the best bourbon in the U.S. comes from Kentucky?
Yeah, great question. So specifically around 1792, things I think about and that I like and I really hone in on here are, there's a lot that goes into whiskey. For 1792, there's three things that really stand out above the rest. One is the mash bill. So again, good corn is grown around here. So our rye comes internationally, and our malted barley comes from the northern United States. But the bulk of your grain, the bulk of your mash bill, is going to be corn for bourbon. And good local corn really, really matters. It doesn't have to travel as far. You don't have to worry about it being, maybe getting moisture during transportation. It's coming from the fields, it's getting dried, being stored, and then coming straight to the distillery throughout the year. So the mash bill is super important. And when you drink 1792, you can taste that sweetness from the corn, but also that good rye spice as well. So that's one part I like to focus on. The second part, and this is more along the Kentucky lines, is the maturation. So when you think about the temperature swings, and not just that, but the overall climate, the humidity swings as well, Kentucky is just prime for having that whiskey go in and out of the wood in that barrel much more drastically than it would, say, in California. In California, or, I used to live in Colorado, it's super dry, and low humidity. So that would drive your proof all the way up, and you would lose a lot of volume. Yeah, you'd have some great oxidation, but you would lose a lot of components too, because you need a good amount of water in that barrel, because certain compounds are only water soluble. They aren't alcohol soluble. So you need that water content in that barrel as well to actually remove some of those compounds from what is in the wood and bring it back into the cavity of the barrel.
Yeah, because certain distilleries in California will actually temperature control their rick houses, right?
Yep.
Is that not something that you guys have to worry about in Kentucky?
Nope. No, we do. So some differences between, I'll talk a little about Buffalo Trace. So our warehouses are not temperature controlled in whatsoever manner. So whatever, I went in warehouse D today. I'll tell you right now, the greatest thing I've tasted this week is, so we're talking about sweet wheat later. I was pulling some samples of sweet wheat to be released later this year, and I am so stoked. Chris, I haven't even told you this yet. It is like, I'm very excited for it. Bottom floor is super cold right now. It's probably in the 40s. Top floor, it's starting to warm up a little bit. We've had a few warm days here. It's probably in the mid 50s, maybe low 60s at the moment. And so, but versus like Buffalo Trace, their warehouses are actually heated a little bit to where it doesn't drop below a certain temperature. So the way a barrel ages at Buffalo Trace is very different from how a barrel ages at Barton. And that kind of alludes to about where we pick barrels for the 1792 single barrel program and the full proof you're tasting, but I'll talk about that later. So,
yeah, and then I have one more question for you. I think we've had this question asked by quite a few of our members, and I always I'm trying to remember to ask it more often. But like, obviously, you're owned by Sazerac. But how would you describe being, Chris, you've been with 1792 for a while. Ross, you sounds like you've been there a little over a year. Like, how would you describe just the culture of 1792? And we were talking about just your extreme passion for whiskey. Obviously, that's probably the center of the culture. But like, how would you describe the culture of 1792 for someone that's, maybe interested in working there or doesn't really know much about the brand?
Yeah. Chris, I can go first unless you want to chime in.
I mean, I can speak from a brand side, having worked on this brand as well as the rest of the Sazerac American whiskey portfolio. I get kind of a different view that I look after 1792 and Weller and Eagle Rare and Stag and all the brands that people line up in the middle of the night to buy. And for me, it's 1792 is kind of like a hidden gem within the Sazerac portfolio, is in that we make some killer whiskey. It's got a really unique brand story. It stands out on the shelf, wins tons of awards, and still seems to somewhat fly under the radar, which is great if you're a whiskey lover and like to hunt those good bottles. But for me, I think it's kind of cool that we have a brand that does fit this unique proposition, that speaks to a different type of consumer, a different type of whiskey journey. And Ross can speak to a little bit about the distillery, but the distillery itself is quite different than Buffalo Trace, which is kind of beautified, well-kept grounds, almost like a Disney World of bourbon. And then you go to Barton 1792, and it's real working distillery.
Yep. Yeah, you said something there, and Ross, I'll let you answer as well. But I actually had this question further down on my list. But I think 1792, at least for whiskey lovers, is considered like this hidden gem that is an amazing product at an affordable price. compared to some of the other brands you mentioned that have all this, extreme markup. Is that, I'm assuming that's a cognitive decision, right? Like, is that something that is important to the culture of 1792, is offering this phenomenal product at what I would consider like a value brand almost? Not you can get a great bottle of Baldwin Bond whiskey for like $50. Is that something you guys talk about a lot and is part of the conversations and culture at 1792?
I would say less from a culture perspective and more about the consumer journey. As I mentioned before, 1792 small batch is really designed as that entry point into premium bourbon, kind of like Buffalo Trace is on that side of the portfolio. Whereas we want consumers that are not super into whiskey to come in and try 1792 for the first time. It's approachable, it's affordable, it's accessible at the shelf. And then they come in at small batch and realize, wow, this is really great bourbon. And they can go and hunt the other expressions and find that we have something for them, even as they go up into the portfolio. I will say that we do have that approach too on the rest of the Sazerac portfolio. It's just we can't control the prices. Once it leaves us, it goes out into the market, and the market dictates what the prices are, which is kind of interesting from a supply and demand perspective. We have an abundance of supply coming online. It just takes most of our whiskeys at least 7 years to come of age. So I would say that's probably the biggest difference. But 1792 as a brand is really designed to introduce new consumers to the category, and then as they develop to let them grow into the brand as well.
Awesome.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So one of my favorite things about the distillery, I mean, I have a lot of favorite things about this place, but Chris kind of hinted to it. We are an industrial working distillery. We just, my goal every day, my purpose is to churn out high quality whiskey safely and efficiently. And what that means to me is with the team we have, Chris kind of talked about Buffalo Trace being a bit of a Disney World, and there's a lot of attention. There's definitely more attention on Buffalo Trace than there is 1792 internally. And I'm very okay with that because it allows the team here to be very entrepreneurial, very creative, probably maybe even a little too much autonomy sometimes, but it allows us to go do certain things, and we're trusted to make that good whiskey day in and day out, and also throw in a few fun things. And I can talk a little bit about the experimental program. That's just to say we have an experimental program, but we get to do a lot of fun things, and I don't feel like I have to jump through a lot of red tape to get things done, which again I love. Coming from a startup in Colorado where it was a very high, fast-paced environment, that has transitioned well into how Barton 1792 operates, because our goal is, like I said, making good whiskey every day, safely and efficiently.
Nice. Awesome. Well, so we were talking before here, but these are single bar picks. Unfortunately, we didn't have the barrel numbers put on the stickers this time, so we'll make sure we don't do that again. But this is the pick 1792 full proof with the Whiskey Club logo right there. And I think someone else in the chat I saw too. I too had saved some of our last full proof pick, and so if you've been a member since the last time we did this. This was the 2021 pick, I think. You can do a side-by-side. So, I had a kamikaze pilot in my whiskey here, unfortunately. A little fly flew in, so I'll have to. So, let's taste the whiskey. So, everyone, as always, you have your whiskey card. Talks about the whiskey, tasting notes, a little bit about 1792, some awards, and then a cocktail recipe. So I'm going to make the cocktail. I haven't done that for quite a while on these calls. I know the cocktail had a lot of ingredients this week, but if you want to try this cocktail and you don't have all these ingredients, we have right now at Eureka, we have a milk punch version of this cocktail, clarified milk punch version, which I have here. But I'm also going to make the drink that's on here as well. So if you don't have all the ingredients and you want to try the cocktail in a clarified milk punch form, you can go to any Eureka and we'll have this through the end of the month. This is called Cupid's Punch for our Valentine's Day cocktail, but the unclarified version is called Peanut Butter Jelly Time. So Ross, go ahead and walk us through Foolproof and give us some tasting notes, and I'll start making this drink.
Yeah, sounds great. So it sounds like you guys have a good pick, but I do not have yours. But I'm going to open up my own Foolproof here. So that I pulled earlier. So one thing, because Trevor told me this would probably be a question, is Foolproof non-chill filtered? The answer is it absolutely is non-chill filtered. Reason being, at that high proof, chill filtration really wouldn't accomplish much. So kind of the breaking point for where chill filtration is effective versus not effective is about between 105 and 110. So this is the one product kind of in the 1792 lineup that has no chill filtration, which I love. People can go back and forth about it, but tasting something that is non-chill filtered just has that better viscous mouthfeel, and that's something that I love about our 1792 Foolproof product. So I talked earlier about the mash bill and maturation. The last one I didn't talk to, and being kind of a fermentation nerd, is our yeast strain. So 1792 really hits three high notes for me. One, great rye spice from the high rye bourbon mash bill in pretty much every single Foolproof pick there is. Two, you get these barrels are generally picked from the top 2 floors of our warehouses. So whenever someone comes on site or barrel samples are shipped to them, the barrels they are picking from are from the top 2 floors. Those floors see the highest level of maturation, so the highest degree at which, and so they see the highest temperatures, the highest temperature swings, and so you get more maturation in that kind of 7 to 8 year mark that most single barrels are selected at. And then third is our yeast strain. So I think I saw there's been a ton of questions, which I absolutely love. So our yeast strain is a house strain, and it produces a ton of a compound called isoamyl acetate, which I love. If you ask anybody, I eat 2 bananas every morning, and I'm normally talking in a morning meeting while I'm doing it. So that is the Ross breakfast. Anyways, there is a ton of banana notes, which is isoamyl acetate from that our whiskey produces, and so you get this beautiful blend of all of the oak notes, the high rye spice, and these wonderful fruity esters like isoamyl acetate. And when you put all that together, it is just a fantastic, big, bold whiskey that has a lot of classic notes, but also has its own spin on what bourbon really is. So,
sorry, Ross.
You're fine. Go for it.
So we'll get to all those great questions here in a minute while I realize I don't have my Hawthorne strainer back here, so I'll have to use a julep strainer.
That's all right. So as I'm nosing this, also feel free if anyone else has their store picks that they're nosing or tasting, throw out some nose comments, taste comments, finish comments. But right off the bat on mine, I mean, you can tell it's 125 proof as well. But I'm getting a ton of banana already, just off a freshly opened bottle.
Awesome. I probably should have given my tasting notes before I just took a sip of that cocktail because that's throwing me off. But
that's all right.
We got I get a lot. So going back to this, I tasted them side by side earlier, and obviously this bottle's been open for a while, so we have oxygen doing its thing. But the pick this time around is much hotter on the nose, and I think that's just due to it being a more freshly cracked bottle. Because over time, right, the oxygen will kind of help mellow out some of those.
Absolutely.
Alcohol notes. So this whiskey's been open for a few years, but this one I get much more brown sugar, caramel, toffee, a little bit of pecan. I get that banana note that you're saying. And then this one, just even in color, it's lightened up quite a bit over the years. And I get kind of more lighter fruit, like some orange and tangerine. But I still get that caramel and stuff. But they're it's very, they're two very different whiskeys.
Yep. So I think it was Mark. I saw you mention butterscotch. That's another classic note that I've gotten from our whiskeys. That butterscotch kind of caramely note really shines through, and I love that note with the bananas. I think I've listened to some of Danny Kahn's podcasts, and he always described it as banana Fosters. So you have that base banana note, but there's plenty of burnt sugar, caramel, butterscotch to go along with those fruity esters, which I think accurately describes it. So, and so all of the barrels you're tasting now. So let's talk wood for a second. Where we got those barrels from was all the same cooperage, and as the whiskey industry has expanded, everyone is getting barrels from multiple places now. So you want to talk about kind of a science experiment that's going on, behind the scenes, but currently in all of our warehouses is, we might get barrels from Georgia or Kentucky or Tennessee or Virginia. And this is going to be kind of my next big, project is how does the wood from different parts of the United States affect, and, yes, they all chart the same, but is all of the wood seasoned the same? Are all the trees of close to similar ages that they're cutting down to make these staves and eventually the barrels? So that is going to be kind of, and I'm really excited to dig into it, is just how do all those variables really play out at the end of the day in our warehouses? And our team was smart enough to break it down by lot number and say, hey, these barrels came from this cooperage and these barrels came from this cooperage. So I can sample and truly understand the differences in the wood.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll all agree that it's a damn fine whiskey.
This is, I'm glad you guys enjoyed. I'm glad you guys keep on coming back to pick more 1792 barrels. So
awesome.
It is it's a full power whiskey, but somehow is still pretty darn smooth on the finish. I don't know how that's possible, but I think it has to do again with that viscosity, and it just coats your tongue. It's nice and oily, all at the same time.
All right, we got a lot of questions here, so I got a couple questions of my own, and then we'll get to the Q&A from the group. If you were able, I just want to show here. So this is what the cocktail looks like without following the recipe on the card here. This is a peanut butter jelly time, and then when we clarify it, it looks more like this. So if you're not able to make this at home, like I said, available at all Eureka. Some shameless self-promotion. Sorry, guys.
Looks good.
So you had mentioned, I don't know if it was on the call or I think you talked about experimentation. So I know you have the port finish, 1792 port finish. Are you guys, I don't know if you can divulge this information, but are you guys part of the experimental program? Are you doing any more finished whiskeys outside of port? I know you had the Thomas More whiskey release was a Chardonnay barrel finish and port, and then one other thing. I think that was released in 2020 or something like that. What else do you guys have on the docket as far as barrel finishes or experimental stuff?
Yep. So short answer is a lot. Longer answer, and I'm super excited about it. Longer answer is we'll start with Thomas S. More. So we have done. I'm in my office. I live in Bardstown, so I'm 5 minutes away. So I told my wife, I was like, I'm just gonna go in for this. I won't bother you, keep you up. So we have the Chardonnay, Port, Madeira, Cab Sauv, Sherry, which is my personal favorite, Cognac, Merlot, Port. I don't think I mentioned Port. I think that's everything. Chris, am I missing one? That's what I have.
think that there's 7 today. So we had that initial release of the 3, then we had 4 more.
Yep.
And yeah, we've got Ross. We think we don't know how much we want to share. We do have more in the works for that brand as well on the cask finish side.
Yeah. And is that how often is that released? Because I don't know if I've ever seen that bottle out in the wild.
It's been pretty sporadic. The intention is to do it once a year or every other year. And as Ross mentioned, there's a pretty vast experimental program across the Sazerac network. But at Barton 1792, Thomas S. Moore was a brand born of experimentation. Back when the port finish was released, and it did really well with consumers and the awards. And we decided, and by we I mean the people that came before Ross and I, decided to go out and procure a lot of different types of casks to finish bourbon in, and put them all away, and said we're going to come back and check on these every so often. And when I came on board, it was time to start launching the brand. It's just a long-winded way of saying we still have more in the hopper, and the intention is to release new ones, 2, 3, 4 every year or every other year, depending on when the whiskey is ready. That is one of the benefits of working for Sazerac, is we don't put whiskey out unless it's ready to go. We won't force whiskey out if it's not great.
Yep.
All right, I got 2 more things, and then we're going to get into the questions. So last thing I want to talk about is something many people may not know is the military special. I just found out about this recently. Can you talk about the military special that you guys do for, and what's that program all about?
Yes. So, and Chris, feel free to hop in here too, because I didn't know much about it until I started here. But military special is kind of a lower tier bourbon that is offered to military at bases across the United States and elsewhere. But it is distilled and aged here at Barton 1792. I don't think it's age stated, Chris, as far as I know. But it still qualifies as straight bourbon whiskey, I believe, on the label. So
this is something you provide to military bases throughout the United States, and it's exclusively for military bases.
Correct.
Can ex-military buy bottles, or how does that work?
I don't know. I think it's only on bases, isn't it, Chris?
I believe it's only on bases, and I'm not sure, but I will say I've done a lot of tastings in my time at Sazerac. This is the first time anybody's ever asked about military special, so I commend you for being the first.
I try to do a little bit of research before these calls, and I just saw that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So, anyways, I just thought it was kind of a quote unquote fun fact. But all right, we're going to get into these questions. But lastly, as always, we need to add some songs to our Spotify playlist. We do every month. I think we've been doing this now for about a year and a half, where we ask our guests to pick a song that they think is a good representation of the whiskey we're tasting. That way, everyone likes whiskey, but everyone also likes, sitting by a fire, turning on the speaker, and listening some whiskey, or listening to some music while drinking whiskey. So, Ross, I believe you had a song selected for this evening.
I did. So, my dad and I, more so him, but we first saw a guy named Joe Bonamassa back. I used to live in Illinois when I was in middle school, high school, and he played in Decatur, Illinois is where we were, small town anyways. Joe Bonamassa showed up there and played in the little city park for free, and we were just kind of blown away. Under the radar, just as 1792. I think a few of us have mentioned this now. Kind of under the radar, guitarist. It's an under the radar whiskey, and he just kind of shocked us, and I think everybody there. And now he tours the world and is an insanely good guitarist. But the song I chose is probably one of my favorite songs by him. My parents are actually seeing him. My mom's birthday is on Thursday, so they're going to Indianapolis and seeing him live. I was not invited. That's okay. Anyways, but they're going to see him live. But this is Joe. I mean, I like a lot of songs. I think I chose Midnight Train, if I remember correctly. So I gotta look back, make sure that's what I said. Slow Train. Sorry, Slow Train. He has a Midnight Train song too, but Slow Train by good old Joe Bonamassa. So, it goes along with 1792 in that, he's pretty darn good. He flies under the radar a little bit, and it's pretty, he's kind of got a classic rock guitar, I would say genre to him, but he's also a little funky, a little jazzy, which goes along with the 1792.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yep.
Awesome. And then, Chris, I don't know if I didn't ask you, but do you have a song, or if not, it's not a big deal.
No, off the top of my head, no. But if something comes to mind, I'll come off.
Got it. Well, my song is by an artist. I actually have the vinyl right here that I was listening to earlier when I was trying to figure this out. So my artist is Samara Joy, and the song I chose was "Linger a While," and it's kind of a jazzy number and perfect for drinking whiskey. And I don't mind if this lingers a while, so that's why I chose that song.
Like that. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, I just officially killed my my pick from a few years ago, so I'm going to savor this one. All right, let's get into some questions here from the group. Thank you, as always, for being members and asking awesome questions. So, all right, Mark Horowitz asks, can you pair a specific mushroom with each 1792 distillate?
Ooh, good question. No one's asked me that one yet. That's which is a little surprising. Honestly, I love Bellettis. So stuff that you will, when I was out in Colorado, I learned how to mushroom forage every once in a while, and you would always find them after the snow melt at about, and depending on where you were, between like 7,000 and 10,000 feet up in the air. But you could pick those things and eat them up, and they were big, bold mushrooms, and just straight up in like a frying pan were absolutely delicious. So I would say those, and they're kind of meaty, oily. Those I never drank them or ate them paired with a whiskey, but knowing the taste, they would go pretty darn well with them.
All right. Well, I fully expect there to be a page on your website now that it talks about mushroom and whiskey pairings.
Noted right here. There you go. You heard it, Chris. So.
All right. Here's another. Sorry, I promise there's some more serious questions, but Sarah Siebelton says, does honey bunches of oats ever show up as a tasting note on any of your whiskeys?
Not yet, but I will work it in there. Don't you worry. So it's just a great cereal. Sorry if there is someone out there who doesn't like it. I think
that like when I was a kid, honey bunches of oats was like the one like healthy cereal that like, or at least my parents told me it was healthy cereal that I actually would eat. So I'm with you on that. All right, Brian Deanda asks, what is the design process for equipment layout planning or design? Does 1792 use AI for any design planning on current or future limited release variations?
Good question. No, not at the moment on anything surrounding AI. Any creativity, I guess, comes from the people you're looking at in the great distilling team and brand team we have. Now, when it comes to equipment layout and how the distillery runs, that's again there's a lot of favorite things I have about the distillery. The equipment is one of those. So the warehouses, some of our warehouses are from the 1930s, 1940s. So same warehouses have been aging that whiskey for almost 100 years. Where we get our grain from is Kentucky or in the surrounding area. That really hasn't changed that much. our yeast really hasn't changed that much over all these years. Our fermenters, some of our fermenters are from 1944. So the same fermenters. Our distillation column was first built in 1961. Yeah, parts have been replaced, but the design is the same. So when you look at the process as a whole, and our mash tubs where we cook our grain, those are the same design as since the 1940s. And so I have some juice from the 40s, the 60s, and the 70s, and it is shocking how similar some of that juice is to today's whiskey. And I just think that is so cool at the end of the day, that we're just kind of like this time capsule that keeps on producing whiskey, maybe versus other distilleries that have gotten new stills or gotten new cookers or new fermenters. We have just continued to make awesome whiskey with what we have here.
Cool. Andrew Grayson says, seems like a lot of big distilleries are looking at American single malt. Is there any American single malt coming from 1792 anytime soon?
Not anytime soon, but we have a cool experimental program.
All right. Jamie Phillips says, what is the most unexpected challenge you faced in the distillation process, and how did overcoming it influence the flavor profile or quality of your whiskey?
Man, great question. So there's been a few. One is when I first got here a year and a half ago, I was, what I knew from whiskey was working at MGP. And so that was kind of my base for how I thought a distillery should run. So they were doing things here, and I was like, what, like, why would we do that? But I took a step back and said, all right, this place makes good whiskey. I'll try it their way. And then, one of my favorite quotes is, for science, you can do anything for science. So I said, all right, we'll do it their way for science, the way it's always been done. And then we'll try a few different trials and see how things turn out. And, there's a reason that we've done it the way we have for quite a while. Now, some things I have changed, but that was a good challenge to me, saying, hey, give everything a shot once before or twice before you really go changing it. So that was a big hurdle for me. The other one was around maturation. So while I was at MGP, I really only dealt with distillery issues. So I was over fermentation and distillation. I never really got into maturation. So that has been a super steep learning curve that I've had no choice but to learn very quickly. So why do we have barrels, or why do we only age our bourbon barrels in the very top of our rick houses? Why do we, what's the benefit of having a warehouse down in the holler or the valley, as they say here, versus on the hilltops? Does it matter if it's on the east or the west? Does it matter if it's on the inside of the ricks or the outside of the ricks? And so all these things that I never had to deal with in the past, I'm trying to learn those very quickly, so that when people are asking me, hey, where should we pull barrels from for 12-year or for bottled and bond or for, what have you? I was like, I got to figure that out, and I got to figure it out ASAP. So again, I am not the only one who makes decisions here. We have an awesome team, and but my curiosity along with their knowledge has led to great things like 12-year, winning world's best bourbon. So those were barrels that we picked and blended, not just me, but as a team. And we said, yeah, this looks like a good combination. So.
Awesome. Sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but T. Carpenter says, what is the biggest misconception about your job?
I don't just sit around and drink whiskey all day.
That's the biggest misconception about my job too.
Yeah. So no, it's every single master distiller has a very different job. Some might be more so on the marketing side and maybe less involved in the plant, but they're still involved in the plant. Some may be very involved in the plant, less on marketing side. Some might be involved in everything. I'm call it lucky, call it interesting. I'm lucky enough to be involved in a little bit of marketing. I'm very involved in the plant and in the distillery. I'm not just kind of the technical lead on site for the distillery and the warehouses. I'm also the people lead. So I manage the teams as well, which is which I love. I love the people aspect and the team we have here. I work on the capital projects, and when new projects come about, I'm the project lead on those. So there isn't really, I'm very involved in the maintenance side of things. I was before I got on the call, I was down on the match floor troubleshooting a steam valve with our supervisor and an operator. It's just, I just get to be super involved with everything. So that was not expected when I first got here, but I've really enjoyed that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my family thinks. They're like, "Oh, you just make cocktails and whiskey all day, huh?" And I'm saying,
Yep.
I wish that's all I did. I mean, sometimes I do that, but yeah, a lot of hats for sure. Pun intended. Yeah. Matthew Archer says, have you experimented with different yeast strains or fermentation methods such as pressure fermentation? If so, interesting results.
So have not dealt with pressure fermentation. I have in the past. So where you basically kept a carbon dioxide cap on the fermenters at a certain pressure. Didn't really see a whole, and that was using, and this is from a GC perspective or gas chromatography. So you run the distillation, you have your whiskey, and you run it through a GC to give you the concentration of different compounds in that whiskey. So I ran it with and without a CO2 cap on it under pressure. Didn't see a significant difference. Now, granted, those fermenters were very tall, so there was already a good amount of head pressure on that fermenter. I think it can play a bigger factor. And again, I have never really brewed beer, but I think it plays a bigger factor when it comes into a brewing fermentation versus a whiskey fermentation, is just my anecdotal data from when I was at MGP. So regarding yeast strains, so it's cool enough that we get to use, so we make quite a few products here. So we have our 1792 lineup, which includes very old Barton line as well. We do Thomas S. Moore. Back in, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 2020, Sazerac purchased the Early Times brand. So Early Times bourbon is now mash distilled and aged here at Barton 1792. So I have access to that yeast strain and other yeast strains that are also part of the Sazerac portfolio. So yeah, I get to, talking about experimentation and loving fermentation, yeast is where I go very quickly. The other one is fermentation temperatures. So for example, we make a rye whiskey here, and we actually just finished distilling it today, and I'm absolutely in love with it. I did that at a much lower fermentation temperature than what our bourbon is normally done at. So that fermentation is done at kind of a lower bushel density, and so the fermentation doesn't need to be as aggressive over 3 days, 4 days, and I'm really happy with how it turned out to not overstress the yeast and allow them to produce a lot more flavors during that fermentation. So yeah, excited to see that one, 6, 7, 8 years from now.
Nice. Well, save me some barrels. We'll do a pick.
Sounds good.
All right, a couple more questions, and we'll choose some winners, and we will. I know it's late for you guys, so thank you again. Well, can we talk about Costco? I guess I should ask that before.
Yeah.
So David Sawyer asks, can you discuss 1792's relationship with Costco? What gets put in the various Kirkland bourbons?
Yeah, so I believe we have 3 products. We have the small batch, bottled and bond, and then I believe it's I don't remember what it's called again. It's not barrel proof.
Single barrel.
Yeah, it's single barrel, and that's done at 120 proof. So we go through and help select barrels as to what gets put into the Costco. I mean, but it's obviously our juice. I mean, it literally says Barton 17. If people haven't seen it, it says Barton 1792 right on the front of the bottles. So,
and how long has that relationship been around?
That's a good question, Chris.
I think it's been 2 or 3 years, so it's relatively recent. Costco is a big customer. They sell a lot of whiskey, and we were excited to work with them to put out something that actually had our name on it, the front of the bottle. which is kind of rare for a private label. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I had heard that you guys made that stuff, but I saw the question here and it sparked that memory for me. All right, let's do one more. Sorry, give me a second here. All right, Tony Simmons says, "What does the foolproof offer from a flavor perspective versus other limited edition expressions beyond the obvious increased ethanol?" Cheers.
Yeah, great question. So we touched on it a little bit earlier, but the fact that it is non-chill filtered plays a big part, and so that's about as close as you can get to barrel proof as you will coming out of Barton 1792. So most of the barrels, so where a barrel is in our warehouses, in our warehouse, will determine that barrel's final proof. So after about 7 years, if a barrel is at the very top of that warehouse, it will generally get to about the mid 130s in proof. Maybe I've seen it top 140 very rarely, but it gets to about 135. Versus barrels in the bottom of the warehouse, which we do not age bourbon there, but so Paul Masson brandy is aged here, is not distilled here, but is aged here and then bottled here. So we have brandy barrels in the bottom, so that way we don't put bourbon down there. Those will actually drop in proof because the temperatures are cooler and the humidity is higher, so there is more water vapor pressure keeping that water in the barrel, so it goes down in proof. When you take them from the top, so it might be 135, so we're adding very minimal water going from 135 down to 125 versus 135 maybe down to 100 for a bottle and bond, or 98.6 for, or 98.7 for single barrel. So that's one of my favorite things. It's as close as you can get to an unadulterated product coming out of the distillery, and those flavors just pop in that foolproof way more than everything else. It isn't just the ethanol. Everything is just in your face with it.
Well, like I said, it's as I finish my last little sip here of my last one. It's phenomenal bourbon. All right, let's run through the questions, and then I don't know. I guess I'll let each of you pick your favorite, and then I'll have the hard choice of who gets first and who gets second. So I'll be the bad guy as always. Let's see here. So we had the question about sorry. Lost my place here. My apologies.
While you're looking for that, I see Kevin asked about what beer I prefer. So I guess there's no drinking age in Belgium, but I lived in Belgium as a kid. So Belgians and Tripels and Belgian IPAs are two of my favorite beers when I do drink a beer. So good question. Same thing with the ester notes. Absolutely love them.
You ever go to Cantillon?
I did not make it. I only lived there until I was in 8th grade. So I won't tell people what year that was.
All right. So we had the mushroom question from Mark about what pairs well with the mushrooms. We had the question about Honey Bunch of the Oats tasting notes. We had the question about American single malt. We had the question about unexpected challenges faced during the distillation process. We had the question about biggest misconception about your job. We had the question about yeast strains and fermentation methods such as pressure fermentation. We had a question about, that was the Belgian question. I guess we can throw that in there since we asked it. Pardon me, sorry. The question about Costco. Question about foolproof. What does foolproof offer versus other limited expressions? I missed anything. So what were I guess we'll start with Chris. What was your favorite question?
I'm going to go with the honey bunches of oats because I learned something new about Ross tonight I didn't know.
Nice.
And I
That's a
think
good
it's fun to have tasting notes that are really unique to your own personal history with food and beverage and your life experiences.
All right, Ross. What was your favorite question of the night?
All right, I'm going nerdy. So my favorite question was definitely around pressure fermentation, just because I've actually been able to experiment with that and see the differences with and without pressure. So that's where my top one goes, with honey bunches of oats as a close second.
Oh wow. Whew. As much as I love the honey bunch of oats question, I'm gonna have to go more of the whiskey nerdy thing, just because that's I love the funny questions, but I'm always gonna side on the more informational side. So Matthew Archer, we got a bottle of 1792 12-year signed bottle coming to you, and then Sarah Steebleton, we got a bottle of sweet wheat coming to you. Both these members have been longtime members, so sorry guys, I apologize for having to make the tough decision here, but I had to err on the nerdier question versus the funnier question. So we'll figure out how to get those bottles to you. And again, Ross, Chris, I know it's a little past 11 p.m. there, so thank you for staying up late with us, and thanks for providing this amazing pick. And we're always happy to do some cool stuff with you guys. So I look forward to that rye barrel pick in about 7 or 8 years.
Me too, Trevor. Thank you for having us. This was a blast. So I don't do a whole ton of marketing events, and you guys have been great. Awesome. This is awesome questions. I really appreciate the engagement.
All right. Have a good night, guys. Thank you.